A scandal inside the White House has shaken up the staff, and the president's response is only adding to the confusion. In public, President Trump is defending a former aide over allegations of domestic abuse, but in private, a source tells CNN the president is calling Rob Porter a sick puppy. The panel tonight, Alex Burns, CNN political analyst and New York Times national political reporter. Rob Estorino, a Donald Trump supporter. Michael Morey, a former communications director for Senate Democratic leader Chuck Schumer. And Evan Siegfried, Republican strategist and the author of GOP GPS. Good to see all of you. Welcome to the table. So, Alex, you first, the White House aides are expressing a lot of confusion. One message is going out from those who came out on all the Sunday talk shows. The president had a very different message on Friday, and then again via tweet. This kind of circling around, trying to convey a message. How troublesome is this for the White House?
Well, look, I think it's a giant problem for the White House that they have at various stages in different ways tried to convey some level of contrition, some level of alarm about what happened with Rob Porter. Certainly General Kelly, the chief of staff, is trying very, very hard to make the case that he handled everything appropriately based on the information he had at the time, and there's still a lot of questions about that. When all of that is going on, when you have a White House chief of staff in survival mode, a White House counsel perhaps in survival mode, and the president goes out and essentially undermines the entire message of contrition, that it jeopardizes the entire enterprise.
And it says they're not talking within the White House.
Or they're talking and then he's going out and doing something different, right? Which, I mean, I covered the 2016 campaign. We all remember the 2016 campaign. That's a very familiar phenomenon from the 2016 campaign, that they all get in a room, they say, this is what we're going to say, and then he goes out in public and says something completely different.
Right, and he welcomed the reporters in. That was kind of an unscripted moment. No one else in the White House really expected that to happen. So, Evan, we're talking about a pattern, whether it's the pattern of the president being on one page and the White House staff being on another. There's also the pattern of how the president has responded to accusations, whether it be Alabama's Roy Moore, whether it be Corey Lewandowski. I mean, the list goes on here. Whether it be Bill O'Reilly, Roger Ailes, the president has taken to the defense, of the men here. This is difficult. Kellyanne Conway came out with a very different message. She said, I do believe the women. But then you've got but ... So, who's leading the course here on this?
What message are the American people going to be hearing? It's not Kellyanne Conway. It's the president, because he's the human starting gun just by the nature of the job. And it's going to have political consequences. We saw last year in 2017 and somewhat this year so far in special elections and regular elections, women are abandoning the Republican Party. We've always been told we have a war on women, which is a fictitious war. And we're making it a reality. On top of that, we have been able to, as a party, get majorities in the House and the Senate by getting married white women in the suburbs to vote for us. But now we're seeing them move away from us as well. And this pushes them away further and further. So when Donald Trump says this, it has political costs. There are also moral costs in that he hasn't said ever, and anybody who's ever stood up and said something bad happened to me, he stood by the accused and never the accuser. No words of sympathy. It's always they're in it for the spotlight or they're liars. What does that say?
And what does it say? Why does he feel that that's beneficial if that's the thinking?
Because Donald Trump is incapable of actually demonstrating human emotion and actually demonstrating some empathy for people who, even if he doesn't believe it, the fact that he can't at least show some sort of reaction that suggests this is wrong, this is bad behavior. In every instance, there's some sort of defense of the perpetrator. And then you have to ask yourself, well, why is this? Well, if you consistently surround yourself with people who consistently get into trouble like this, you have to start saying, why is that? Well, perhaps because it's a worldview that's shared by the president. And I think we've seen that time and time again throughout the campaign, throughout his presidency, that this is a man who has trouble with women broadly.
So is this a prelude to there being a shakeup in the making, that you've got this mixed messaging, that you've got the president standing behind, his comments, also throwing his support and saying he's standing behind, by way of Kellyanne Conway, words, Chief of Staff John Kelly, his job is not in trouble?
I think the president is a little right and a lot wrong. A little right because we see the rush to judgment right now in Hollywood, in the business world, where there are innocent people who are getting trampled and wrongly accused. However, in this case, especially as the president, someone in his inner circle, with pretty much proof that something happened at the very least, he should be empathetic and say what he said, if he wants to say that, but then ... But we also need to protect the women here, understand that it is likely that she's telling the truth, and be human, as you were saying.
But he sends the message, does he not, that this is more political than it is about morality, because the president himself was quick to, condemn Al Franken. There was a photograph of,
well, there was a photograph of him doing something. He was in that picture.
Exactly. But the president was quick to say, this should cost him his job. And now he's saying there ought to be due process, and that these jobs, that their livelihood should not be destroyed.
The bigger issue is that the White House knew about this. The White House knew about this for a long time. In fact, the security clearances weren't granted because of this. And so the fact is that no one did anything about it until such a point as it became public. Tells you everything you need to know about the kind of character that is unnecessary to actually serve in the White House.
And that's why the timeline is so important. The timeline that is still right now, mystifying. We don't know what happened, who knew what when, although reportedly, John Kelly did know in November, but the White House is trying to backtrack on that.
Right, and they are eventually going to need to answer those questions, whether
Will
it's to
they?
the press soon or whether it's potentially to Congress at some point down the line. But look, there's also a backdrop for this that I think is really important to understanding why they have handled things the way they've handled things, which is they have had a devil of a time getting anyone to go work in the White House, right? That traditionally in an administration, a new presidency, people are banging down the doors to get these jobs in the White House. And if there's anybody, and if there's anybody who has any blot on their record, they're out. Because they will eventually embarrass the president. And forget spousal abuse. That's a capital crime as far as a political employment is concerned. But anything, a DUI, things that are clearly, far less severe, although still criminal, you're totally disqualified. But you're in a position now where General Kelly is looking around him and saying, well, who do I even have to work for?
Right, but a timeline or an explanation is important, because we're talking about Rob Porter and maybe between 30 and 40 others who have been able to work on an interim clearance.
Yeah, look, there's no way that they didn't know something was up. I mean, you can't be there with an FBI clearance and a full background check before you even enter that building for the first time, and a red flag was not put up. Somebody had it on their desk like, we got to look out for this, and maybe it wasn't finalized, but I'm sure they had a lot more than they're showing right now.
All right, thank you so much, gentlemen. Appreciate your time. We'll talk again very soon, in minutes.